So welcome everyone to the virtual town hall on transit and climate change. We are thrilled to have a great group of co-hosts and an excellent group of panelists here today. I am Megan Owens. I'm the Executive Director of Transportation Riders United. And since we have our panelists will be talking more later, we'll jump through and we'll wait until they are introducing themselves. But we have a great agenda. We've got a keynote about transit and climate change from a lady who wrote the report on it. I'll also give an overview of transit challenges and opportunities here in this region. We'll hear more about the Turn Oakland Green campaign, explore intersectionality about how these issues tie in together, and a great youth voter project, and then open it up to your discussion. So I want to, let's share these poll results so so y'all can see what we have, who all we have going. We have a few Detroiters, clearly our co-hosts of the Keep Oakland County or Turn Oakland County Green campaign in the house today, half of our attendees. And most people rarely ride transit. We certainly understand that in this area that can be a challenge. We've got some daily and weekly riders, but a good number who rarely are able to ride, which is certainly an understandable challenge. We've got a lot of people out there making sure to be walking, biking, a lot of work from home, car sharing. So we've got a lot of different ways people are getting around from across this region, just to give a bit of an introduction there. So I want to, before we turn it over to Haley, I want to make sure to invite everyone to participate. We've got 50 plus people on, so we can't have everybody chatting, but we will certainly make sure to be following the chat box. If you have comments, thoughts, ideas, links that are relevant, if you want to share why you do ride transit or why you don't, this is certainly a judgment-free zone. Share a little bit in that chat box. If you have specific questions for our panelists, there's a Q&A box as well. So put questions for the panelists in that Q&A box. So I think that is enough from me. I will turn it over to Haley Richardson. She has been with the Transit Center, a national group out of New York City that's really working to put transit at the heart of cities. And they do great research and all sorts of different advocacy work around transit. And one of the latest, greatest reports, in my opinion, is a Green New Deal for transportation, for city and suburban transportation. So I will turn it over to Haley. If we can make sure.
Hi.
There we go.
And you know, I am the Senior Communications Associate at Transit Center, as Megan said. Because we're a national foundation, I have to keep kind of a 30,000-foot view of everything that's happening in the US. So I'm really excited to hear, get a little more into like what you guys are experiencing on the ground in Detroit. So I'm just going to share my screen. If I can figure out how to do that. Great. So I want to talk to you guys today about a report that I co-authored about what a Green New Deal for urban and suburban transportation should look like. We were really heartened to see last year when Rep. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Ed Markey put out the Green New Deal. We were heartened to see that transportation was included in it and placed within the context of the climate emergency. However, we found the resolution itself to be fairly thin and an invitation to advocates like us to really think expansively about how changes to federal transportation policy might result in better outcomes, because it has largely been a disaster for the climate and for equity. So we worked with Transportation for America, Data for Progress, and the McHarg Center at the University of Pennsylvania to put together this report. And so I just want to make sure to acknowledge those awesome folks that worked with me on this. So, you know, this presentation had to include a graph, right? You know, transportation is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in the US. We have one of the most energy intensive transportation systems in the developed world. And any advances in technology and in fuel efficiency that we've been, that cars have implemented has been vastly outstripped by the amount that we're driving. So between 1990 and 2017, a 50% increase in driving overwhelmed an 18% increase in fuel efficiency. So that caused emissions to go up by 22% over that time. So, you know, this has catastrophic consequences for public health, in addition to the harms that it does for the climate. You know, so in addition to greenhouse gas emissions, particulates from tailpipes, tires, and brakes poison the air, with the harm disproportionately borne by the residents of Black and Latino communities. And this, of course, is in addition to the tens of thousands of people that are killed on our roads every year. So federal transportation policy largely works to funnel money towards roads. Billions of dollars every year go towards constructing new roads that continue to cut through low-income communities. This is not just something that you learned about in your urban planning textbook. Cities like Portland, Denver, and Houston all currently have plans to expand highways through low-income neighborhoods. And so, you know, this has tremendous consequences, of course, cutting communities off from each other, encouraging sprawl, and, you know, ever-increasing emissions. So 80% of federal transportation funding goes towards roads. And of course, that means only 20% is left over for transit. And one of the things to know about the federal highway program is it's really easy to get money. You don't have to fill out, you know, you don't have to jump through hoops, whereas for transit, you really have to scrape and claw for every dollar that you get. So, you know, as a result of this, we have a system that, you know, outside of a few large cities, we have a really infrequent transit system. We have really infrequent transit systems that are just dwarfed by this fossil fuel infrastructure. So transit funding on a federal level is primarily administered through the FTA's Capital Grants Program. And this program is, as I mentioned, really hard to get through. There's a lot of hoops to jump through. And so it's also really oversubscribed. There's a pipeline of, you know, projects that go between presidential administrations. And it has a focus on cost savings. So what you get is a lot of transit projects in the wrong places, like highway medians, where it was cheap to get land, but nobody wants to ride, nobody wants to walk across a highway to get to a train stop. So you know, these projects are sort of doomed from the start. You also get projects that are sort of done under the guise of economic development, like your infamous Q-Line streetcar in Detroit. So, you know, those are the type of things that just aren't working for us. So since the 1990s, the FTA only gives operating money, which, you know, enables agencies to run buses and trains. It only gives operating assistance to very small transit agencies. So most have to raise their own money locally for operating assistance. And so this means that most are underfunded. And as you can imagine, that creates a vicious cycle where infrequent and unreliable service leads to declining ridership, which leads to service cuts and an unwillingness from the public to make additional investments in transit. So as a result, fewer than 10% of Americans live within walking distance of transit that comes every 15 minutes or less. So these are the type of things that we really need to change. And this has tremendous implications for socioeconomic mobility. As you can see on this chart, the number of jobs that you can reach by driving in 30 minutes in Detroit vastly outstrips the number of jobs you can reach by transit. And studies have shown that access to good transportation is the #1 determinant for whether folks can get out of poverty. So it's really important to change this calculus. Another thing is that, you know, Americans who depend on transit are also forced to contend with broken and missing sidewalks without curb cuts and bus stops that are a little more than a pole in the ground. Sidewalks are typically left to municipal governments and to private property owners. So, you know, you get a patchwork like this that is just really a nightmare to navigate by foot or by wheelchair. And so the really interesting thing is that folks want a way out of this. As part of our GND research, we worked with YouGov polling to talk to 1,000 voters across the ideological spectrum. And people want better transit. They feel trapped in their cars, and they want us to spend more money on transit, and they think that the US would benefit substantially from more transit investments. So in fact, the voters are farther along than a lot of politicians are, but we'll get to that later. So this is the point in the presentation where I feel like we have to talk about EVs, because a lot of the discourse around a Green New Deal and transportation just sort of involved electrifying the vehicle fleet. And you saw that reflected in most of the Democratic presidential candidates' transportation plans mostly consisted of EV incentive programs. And so our belief is that electrification is a necessary but insufficient response to the crisis. It's impossible to meet our climate goals without reducing the amount of driving we do overall. So Project Drawdown is a group that creates scenarios for how you would meet climate targets. And so this is just a sample of what might it require to actually start to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And you see that, you know, electric cars are part of it, but you also have to grow public transit, you have to create more walkable cities, you have to, you know, allow for bike infrastructure and e-bike usage to flourish. California estimates that in addition to EV adoption, every person in the state would need to reduce their daily driving by 1.6 miles to reach the state's 2030 climate targets. This holds true in many other states as well, but California is fairly long in this discourse. And the other thing too is that electric cars are still cars. They still cause sprawl, and they still crash into each other. And they're also really expensive to own and operate. And so this graph is from 2018. I imagine that it's only more acute in the face of COVID, but folks are being forced to buy cars that they can't afford, and then they fall behind on their loan payments and get into a really bad situation. So, you know, we think that this is not a tenable solution to the climate crisis. And I also feel the need to acknowledge COVID-19, because you're hearing a lot of discourse about how COVID means the end of cities. It means, you know, people aren't going to take transit anymore. And to that I would say, you know, yes, there very well may be a dip, and there already is a dip in transit ridership. You know, folks are showing that if they can avoid transit, that's what they're doing right now. But viruses are temporary, and climate change is potentially forever. And so at some point in a year or so, a year or two, you know, I'll be realistic. We're going to be on the other side of this, and we have to build a bridge to get to a life beyond COVID, because as I mentioned, for all these reasons, the current transportation system is not working for Americans. Also, because transit agencies have experienced such a decline in ridership, their revenue is just being hammered, and yet they're faced with this urgency of running the kind of service that keeps riders from being crowded. And so this is all the more reason for why we need federal assistance for transportation. So how do we get there? The first thing we need to do is stop building new roads. We need to say, if we want to give money to roads, it needs to be for maintenance. And this is something that in our poll, folks felt really strongly about, that we should not be building new roads instead of prioritizing maintenance. Because, you know, we've heard for so long about, you know, crumbling infrastructure, and yet, you know, we just keep throwing money at the problem without any accountability. So I think, you know, it's more important than ever to say, roadway funding needs to go towards maintenance and maintenance only. And we need to aim to put the majority of Americans within walking distance of frequent, high quality public transit by 2030. So we're proposing a major new investment in transit, increasing federal support for public transportation to $50 billion a year, which adds up to $300 billion over the course of a potential 6-year authorization. And so 20 billion of that would go towards operating assistance, which would allow transit agencies to quickly scale up service, provide networks of frequent routes to underserved users, and expand lifeline options for folks in rural areas. And just to talk about this question of service, it's always really useful to talk about Canada and compare transit service between US cities and Canadian cities, because Canadian cities have similar built environments to the US, right? They've fell prey to the sprawling development patterns that we have here, but they just run more transit service. And so as a result, transit ridership is 2 to 5 times higher in places that just run more service, as you'll see here in Toronto, compared to a place like Denver. It's not even comparable how much service they're actually running. So when folks talk about we need to build, we need to we need to build new trains, we need to do this, we could have such a huge impact if we just started running buses more frequently in these neighborhoods. And so this is one of our favorite videos about what transit service should be like. It should feel like it's better than driving. You don't have to check a schedule. You can just walk up and go. It's available whenever you need it. And you can go wherever you want, and you can go faster than the car sometimes. And to replace this capital grants program, we just imagined a $6 billion a year formula funding program that you don't have to jump through hoops to get to. You just receive it automatically, as well as an additional $6 billion a year for projects that explicitly improve access for low-income people. So maybe some of these projects from the 2016 Detroit Transit Referendum would actually get realized. And so we need to make walking a lot easier by funding the ADA transportation mandate to make public infrastructure accessible. We need to fix sidewalk gaps. We should create a pedestrian priority, set aside block grants explicitly for sidewalks, curb ramps, crosswalks, ADA transition plans, and road diets. And we think that cities and municipalities should be on the hook for tracking this sort of stuff and have a plan to fill in the gaps where they're missing. We also want to ensure a just transition that supports secure, well-paying jobs in the transit industry and funds transit training and apprenticeship programs for folks transitioning potentially out of the auto industry. A fun fact is that every $1 billion invested in public transit creates more than 50,000 jobs and returns 3.7 billion over 20 years. And jobs building complete streets generate way more jobs than jobs that just build road-only construction projects. And so we recognize that it's not feasible to build or to run frequent transit everywhere. And so this is where electric vehicles do have a role to play. So we're calling for an EV incentive program that's weighted by income, geography, and vehicle size. So folks should receive EV incentives for rural folks that should receive them, and low-income people, and they should be weighted by vehicle size. So you shouldn't be receiving EV incentives for buying SUVs. So I just talked about the obstacles briefly. This is the slide that makes people mad, but the truth is that most people, even your favorite Democratic politicians, don't really get this stuff. Bernie Sanders consistently votes highway spending bills out of committee. And of course, his climate plan had a huge focus on electrification. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez has said that new roads should be part of a Green New Deal for transportation. So, governors across the US have largely bought into the idea that we need new roads to solve congestion, even though that's the opposite of the reality. So, we have a lot of education that we need to do of elected officials about, the harm caused by a commitment to road building above all else. And of course, the all-powerful highway lobby. You know, it's a really sweet situation that we have going where politicians can, you know, say that they are giving money to job creation in their communities, and then the construction companies get these jobs, and it's just a really great way to move money around without actually any accountability or, you know, outcomes. So this cycle needs to be disrupted and become a virtuous cycle. So the great part about public transit is that is one of the most powerful equalizers in society, and we don't need to do any additional R&D research. We know what works. We've seen it work elsewhere, and we don't need any exotic technology like flying cars or even autonomous vehicles. So what we need is the political will to get it done. And so to read the full report, you can go to, and the polling memo that I referenced, you can go to transitcenter.org/publications. And thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Haley. It looks like we've got some good discussion. You spurred a lot of good discussion in the chat about some of the challenges, well, why Detroit has so much parking, and how great it would be to be on one of those rapid buses with its own dedicated lanes. We've been fighting for a number of years to get some dedicated lanes, but we'll see. We'll see if we can make some progress there. Now we're going to do a lot more discussion later, but I wanted to take just a couple of quick questions while we have them. One is, will we be pushing for tax credits for all EVs, not just automobiles, looking at e-bikes and other smaller vehicles? Any thoughts on that, Haley?
We didn't include other vehicles in the our document itself, but my understanding is that's something that Data for Progress is looking at further. So the section about EVs in this report is kind of a taste of what's to come. So if you think e-bikes should be included, you should let Data for Progress know. But I think it's a great idea.
Excellent. And that might even relate. How can someone get involved in advocating for increased transit funding and a truly inclusive Green New Deal? Are there specific, we got a lot of passionate people here. Are there specific actions people should be taking to help support this work?
Yeah, I mean, I think, as I mentioned, it's largely about the education of your elected officials, because like I said, most folks just don't get it, and they just keep voting for the same thing over and over again. We did see a fairly promising bill come out of the House this year. I'll just put it out there that we are an independent foundation, so I can't really comment on specific legislation. But you know, I would say that there are some policymakers that are starting to get it. Chuy Garcia, Ayanna Pressley are really some of the leaders in Congress. So, you know, but I would say start with educating your local politicians about why this stuff matters.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we will definitely explore a lot more of that as we move on in some of the discussions. So I want to thank Haley. You'll be able to stick around for more discussion at the end? Excellent. Excellent. Well, in talking with our co-hosts in planning this event, we realized there may be a lot of people who don't have very much experience with transit, who don't necessarily know all too much about what transit we have here in the Detroit area. So I'm going to do a overview for us about what's happening in the Detroit area. What are the opportunities and the challenges for transit in this region? Let's see if I can get my screen share up. Oops. Well, and all right. So, so if I were to summarize Detroit area transit in just a couple of words, I would say essential, patchwork, and underfunded. Those are definitely a number of the key terms that address the transit that we have. As this map shows a little bit, we have some really essential transit services like here in Detroit and some of these suburban routes and out in Ann Arbor, but we have a lot of gaps and a lot of struggles. So in case anyone's not familiar, the city of Detroit runs the DDOT bus service. They, before COVID-19, were providing more than 80,000 rides a day. So a really essential way for many people in the city to get where they need to go. And as we were discussing in the chat a little bit, that something like 30% of Detroit households don't have access to a car. So getting around on bus is often one of the only options that they have for travel. So DDOT does have a pretty robust system of routes within the city. They recently developed these Black Connect 10 routes that run 24/7 and at least every 15 minutes during rush hours. Now, not necessarily all day, and there's also a number of other neighborhood routes, but DDOT has struggled to maintain enough. Well, it had in the past struggled with enough buses. Now it's more of a struggle of enough bus drivers to maintain that service and to ensure that the buses do show up on time when people are depending on them. But a lot of service throughout the city itself. The SMART runs the suburban bus system between suburbs and between the city and the suburbs, roughly 25,000 rides a day, especially commuter service. Now they, when COVID hit, they took an even bigger hit because a lot of their routes were taking people from the suburbs down to the into the city, and without nearly as many people utilizing working downtown, they've taken a big hit there too. So so they have an interesting breadth of service, trying to cover much of a enormous 3-county area. Again, very really solid service on some of the busiest routes, on their fast routes on Woodward, on Gratiot, on Michigan, that do run every 15 minutes and do run seamlessly between the city and the suburbs. And in parts, as you can see on the right, Southeast Oakland County, for example, and into Pontiac, has pretty dense service where you can get the vast majority of places you need to go. But there's also a lot of gaps in the system, either communities that are not part of the service or areas that SMART is just spread out too broadly to be able to cover. Now, again, important to recognize COVID. Now, both bus services are continuing to operate. There are an awful lot of essential workers, a lot of people working in hospitals, working in medical or in food service, et cetera, who do very much need to keep up riding. And so both agencies have required masks. DDOT's even given out something like 500,000 masks to riders on the buses over the last several months. Both are not requiring any fares so that most customers can use the rear doors. Certainly the front doors are still available for people with disabilities who need the ramp or the lowering. They're sanitizing them all the time. They're working to add sneeze guards around the area, around the drivers, and they're trying to ensure safe enough spacing between passengers, but that only works if they have frequent enough service. And DDOT has struggled a little bit to provide enough service. And sometimes if a bus is crowded, they either have to leave people behind, which is not acceptable, or people get too crowded and it's hard for them to stay safe. So they're still working through some of those challenges. We're still pushing them hard to make sure that they do get enough service on the road. As was mentioned, we do have the Q line, a modern streetcar that runs 3.5 miles through the downtown and midtown areas. It was about $150 million paid for by businesses and foundations, as well as some grants from a few federal grants. It hasn't been operating during COVID, which would be nice if they were, because they actually do have a lot of space and the drivers are separated, but we'll see when they get operating again. I should say the systems have worked to coordinate a lot better together in recent years. You can, in fact, well, once fares are being charged again, get a single card or a single app and ride any of DDOT Smart or the Q line unlimited for a number of hours with just one fee. So that's been really convenient to make it easier for people to transfer between systems and to have the and to have a lot less confusion as to how the systems work. But as I said, patchwork is one of the big problems. SMART is each community decides whether they want to be part of the SMART bus service or not. Well, all of Macomb County has thus far chosen to be a part of it at the county level. Each town in Wayne and Oakland decides. So you have weird holes like Bloomfield Hills where the buses have to drive right through without stopping. You have areas like Rochester and Rochester Hills, like Novi, like Livonia, where there's clearly a need for bus service, but because the city council won't even put it on the ballot, there just is no service there. And it's baffling to a lot of people. Like when IKEA moved into Canton, they said, wait, what? How is there no bus service in a major suburban community? But that's the challenge that we have. All of these all of this background coloring shows all of the areas that have enough population and enough density in order to really need fixed route bus service. And so you can see, while there are some areas that have pretty frequent service, these thicker lines, there's huge gaps where people have no options for how to get around, a huge challenge. And one of the reasons we have so many challenges is that we spend less than any other major metropolitan area. Sorry, that circle was supposed to be on Detroit, not on Virginia Beach, but we're right above Virginia Beach and Tampa, or at least we were a few years ago. I hear Tampa's investing. And so it's not like we're trying to say we need to spend as much as New York or San Francisco or Seattle, but can we at least keep up with places like Milwaukee or Cleveland or Atlanta in terms of the amount we invest so that we can have a higher quality of bus service? What's possible? There have been a number of plans evaluated to figure out how to address these gaps. Like, first and foremost, let's connect to more places. Let's go to Rochester and Novi, Plymouth, Livonia. Let's connect Detroit to Ann Arbor. We need to fill in those gaps to ensure everyone can get to the places that they need to go, regardless of where they are. We need to have a lot higher frequency. Running every 15 minutes should be the norm, not just on a few specialty routes. And having express connections. Express routes to the airport are enormously popular every time we go into the community and ask people what they want. More park and ride for people who might need to drive a little ways, maybe from South Lyon into Novi, but then can take an express route straight to their office. Those are just a few of the improvements that have been proposed, but right now, the way the legislation is created, or the RTAs, the Regional Transit Authority is created, every county has to affirmatively vote to place transit funding on the ballot. And Macomb County has a veto, and they won't let full 4-county funding go out back on the ballot. And there were efforts to allow 2 or 3 counties to go forward, but the legislature blocked those. So unfortunately, we won't have a chance to vote this year on investing in substantially greater transit for our community. But there's still some silver linings. There's new leadership at the transit agencies who are actively seeking ways to improve the service that they are providing with the dollars they do have. We finally have transit supported leadership in Oakland, Wayne, and Washtenaw counties who are all very committed on both the executive and legislative sides to improving transit and are working hard to make it happen. The RTA is going to be working this year to update those transit plans and adjust them based on how things have changed. And there will be opportunities for the public to weigh in and look for ways to make improvements both in the short term as well as with investments into the long term. So that is my hopefully relatively quick recap of the transit that we have in Southeast Michigan and some of the challenges that we're facing. And certainly that explains why our poll was showing a lot of people don't ride transit. It's because we have so many gaps. And as someone mentioned, oh yeah, Kaylee mentioned in the chat, a lot of those smart buses only run once an hour or every 45 minutes. And so it's extremely infeasible, and I won't say impossible, but extremely difficult to, in order to provide enough transit in those communities. So, so one question, to touch on two questions real quick. Why is Macomb County vetoing putting 4-county funding on the ballot? That's a slightly, a little more complex of an answer, but in short, they feel like they've got enough. They've said, we've got smart bus service, and we don't feel like we need anything more. We don't need any faster or more frequent buses than we have now. The county executive has said he doesn't hear from riders, which I know from many of you who are on the line, from several people who are on the line, that many people have reached out and said they very much do want to have more service in the region, in the county. But at least the story we hear from the Macomb County executive is that they're more concerned with issues like roads and jobs than by improving transit, and they don't want to, and if this of course costs money. I mean, transit takes an investment. This is probably somewhere around a 1.5 mil property tax that would be needed to make all of those enormous expansions, and they don't want to pay it. They don't want to pay it. So there have been a lot of efforts to try to figure out what would get them on board that have not thus been successful, but that's definitely one of the challenges we're facing. Thomas asked how you convince municipal officials to prioritize pedestrian transit infrastructure. That's definitely a challenge. I think some of the stuff Haley was talking about is really important in saying, if there was more federal and state funding for pedestrian and transit infrastructure, if the assumption wasn't, if like the federal government pays for 80% of a new road, but only 40 or 50% of a new transit line, if you can jump through all the hoops and hurdles that they put in place. Same with the state. The state of Michigan says 90% of transportation dollars have to go into roads, and up to 10% can go into transit. So a lot of those are policy decisions that we need to change at the state or federal level. But you're right, municipal officials certainly can choose to make transit or pedestrian infrastructure a priority. We're starting to see some of that in areas like Ferndale or in parts of Detroit, where they're building more bike lanes, wider sidewalks, but it's going to take a long time to ensure that to make up for decades and decades of disinvestment. So I want to put up another quick poll, because True is very much looking to understand what are people's priorities, to what extent is transit still a critically important issue, given the other challenges that we're facing in the community? Is it still a top priority for many people, or is it a medium or low priority, recognizing other issues? And what are the things that need to be done? What do you think needs to be improved? There's a lot of different improvements we would like to see happen. If we can't do everything all the time immediately, what are the top priorities? True is going to be reaching out throughout the region over the next 6 to 9 months, talking with bus riders and with community partners and with elected officials to really get a broader understanding of what the current transit needs are in this, well, current and post-COVID world, and ultimately a post-COVID world. So you guys will be among the first to provide us that input. Let me give people, looks like about half people have voted so far. We'll give another 10 seconds or so for anyone who is interested in sharing your input on what are the most, how important is transit given other priorities. Obviously, this is a slightly biased audience because you're on a transit, you're spending your evening on a transit webinar, but we also, it's good to see actually quite a broad range of issues that are important. Again, we will certainly do more questions as we move towards the end. So we got most of y'all voting. So just in case people were curious, we are glad to see that transit, despite COVID economic issues, other challenges, or maybe because of them, transit is among the most important issue for our participants here. And we have quite a range of improvements that people want to see happen, but definitely run buses more places that they don't go now. I know we have some people on who are working hard to expand service into Rochester and elsewhere. Things like running more frequently, less waiting, more reliability, faster service. Those are all really important improvements that we will be working to make happen in the coming years. So enough from me. One of our excellent co-hosts for this event is the Turn Oakland County Green campaign, which is actually has a whole bunch of different organizations who are a part of making that happen, who are looking at the opportunities as Oakland County has become more, I don't know, enlightened, less in the Stone Age, how to make Oakland County a real leader on issues of climate and transit and such. So I will introduce Andrew Sarpolis from the Sierra Club, who can tell you more about their project and perhaps ways that you can get involved. Andrew?
Great. Well, thank you so much, Megan. Just tons of amazing information from two really awesome transit enthusiasts who are really in the weeds on things. I don't think I can replicate the policy knowledge that's been shared here, but what I can tell folks is, and I know the question was asked earlier, is how can you get involved? And I'm gonna go ahead and just spend 5 minutes here, if you'll bear with me, kind of sharing my presentation here on some of the things that we're doing at the county level and where we need help. And if you're not in Oakland County, which about half of you apparently are not, I say bring this to your own county, especially Macomb County. You know, we saw that, we see now that a lot of the transit conversation is moving over there, but I wouldn't say that the battle lines are necessarily drawn yet. I think we need to have a really strong response here in Oakland County, and we need people to be talking about transit as well. So let's start with our campaign and why Oakland County. Well, Oakland County is a tremendous area of natural treasures, and so is the whole state of Michigan. I mean, we have 1/5 of the world's surface fresh water here. We have more lakes in Oakland County than any other county in Michigan. We actually have an endangered species in Michigan. We have the largest community of Poweshiek skipperling butterflies left in the entire world. There are only 70 in Oakland County, and that is the largest grouping. And they live in our wetlands. We have an incredible amount of solar jobs here, over 1,000. We have the highest gross domestic product in the entire state, 25% of the entire state's GDP almost. A really highly skilled workforce. People ranging all the way from really rural communities to really urban communities, and one of the most underinvested transit systems in the nation. And so when we talk about climate change and transit specifically, I think folks may have seen this in the invitation, but if you haven't, just so you're familiar with the stat right now, transportation is now the largest emitter, right? So it's about 30%, it's about a third of our emissions, a little more. It used to be energy, the stuff we were burning to actually power our homes. But now the ways we get around are one of the biggest climate hurdles. And if you think, I don't have a ton of time to go into it here, but you know, maybe on a future presentation, we can dive into how intimately our water is connected to our climate. And if we enjoy the natural treasures we have here, you know, as I do, and I've lived in Oakland County almost my entire life, or at least around Oakland County. I lived right on the edge where I graduated from the schools. It's something I want to protect. It's something I grew up with, and I think a lot of us have a lot of great memories in Michigan. And so our natural resources are under threat, and the flooding is going to cause really, really severe problems to our infrastructure. It's going to raise costs. It's going to make our communities more unlivable. And a lot of it is related to this question of how we reduce transit emissions, because that being the largest sector now, it hasn't received as much focus as it probably should. When we started the campaign, we asked, what are the values of Oakland County residents? Let's just be real here and say, Oakland County, they're good, they're better now, but was historically the roadblock on transit, right? Like we had a county executive that wanted to distance himself from Detroit, wanted to distance himself from the transit system, and spent many, many years opposing any sort of transit reforms. Is one of the reasons we're in the mess we're in right now. And we've lost a lot of economic development. We've lost a lot of social mobility. We've lost a lot of livability in our communities, and we've had no climate action. But we can change that, and I think it's important we change that, because there's a symbolism in taking one of the most progressive counties in the Metro Detroit area on these issues and turning it into the most progressive leader. And we've had some real upset elections in the past couple of years. We have a majority on the county commission now that wants to do something pro-transit. We have a county executive that's really enthusiastic about it. And I think the local level is where we can start to look at how do we design our communities to be better, and to look at how we reduce transit emissions. Because at the end of the day, it shouldn't be something you have to think about. I think a lot of people think of transit, in the Metro Detroit areas, maybe, oh, I got to drive to a bus stop, or I gotta sit around for an hour. That's not what good transit looks like. We may have been raised that way, but people don't think about it. It becomes part of their routine. In cities where we see really robust transit is actually, one of the quickest and best ways around. And so if we can think about how do we design our communities, that's going to happen at the local level. We need to improve the design of our communities in a way that integrates biking, that integrates walking, that integrates all these transit improvements, so that we can have people not thinking about it, but while they're not thinking about it, they're also not burning all those fossil fuels, polluting our air, making our communities less livable. A lot of people think pollution, oh, that's just a Detroit problem where they've got all that heavy industry. Actually, a couple of years ago, one of the worst ozone air days in the entire country was in Oak Park. Why is that? Well, it's because you get those temperature inversions above the freeways there, and you have all those cars. So the pollution can strike anywhere, and when we improve our transit system, we're also protecting our water, making our air safer to breathe, doing all sorts of other really, really important stuff. We've released a platform. I encourage everybody to go read it. Transit is one of our 5 main pillars. If you want to get involved, we are asking people to lobby their county commissioners right now and set up meetings with their county commissioners. We've only met with 5 county commissioners. There are 21 county commissioners. So we need to have people going into their communities, telling their county commissioners that this is an important issue. The only way this is going to get done is if we build a grassroots movement. So we outline a lot of issues. They're all interconnected. You can read our platform. You can also attend a free lobby training. Learn everything you need to know about citizen lobbying right at Turn Oakland County Green. We've got a whole tab, lots of informational resources, a couple of videos to turn you into a citizen advocate at the local level. So I ask folks just to take a look and to get involved if you can. We have a really awesome campaign. We've engaged hundreds of volunteers. We've already, we're working with the county on some habitat restoration projects. We've helped them set some climate goals. And I want us to help make our transit goals some of the next things we're able to come back and say we were successful on. So please consider volunteering. There's a tab on there you can fill out if you're interested. And I'll hand it back over to Megan.
Excellent. Thank you, Andrew. You guys are doing some really great work. True's definitely proud to be a supporting partner where we can in ensuring that transit's an important piece of that critical effort. And while it may have gotten slow to touch by the COVID crisis, it's a critical one move forward. And so I encourage everyone, if you're looking for ways to get involved, that is a really important opportunity to get involved, especially in Oakland, but heck, we need some of the same stuff in the other counties too. So as Andrew mentioned towards the end there, there are a lot of very interconnected issues. It is very hard to separate out one issue from the next, to talk about transit without talking about economic development. Even the discussions that we've been having in the chat have touched on land use, on sprawl, on oh shoot, I mean, there were several other very interrelated topics about economic opportunity, about service for people with disabilities, ensuring access for everyone. So I thought it would be a great opportunity to invite in a good friend, Jeffrey Nolish, who has worked in a whole lot of different areas, has been whether from military to government to politics, and is now the policy director, I believe, at Detroit Disability Power. And to talk a little bit about intersectionality and how a lot of these issues are connected, both are especially important for people with disabilities as well as so many others. Jeffrey, do we have you with us? Oh, there you are. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hey everyone, thanks for having me, Megan. Can you hear me okay? Great, so I have about 5 minutes. Good evening, my name is Jeffrey Nolish. I am the Policy Director for Detroit Disability Power. Thank you to Megan and Andrew and everyone for allowing me to participate today. I would say in an earlier life, I was the mobility specialist at the Planning and Development Department at the City of Detroit, so I definitely worked on transportation and mobility issues. And in college, or in grad school, I studied climate change. So I'm well-versed and miss a lot of these discussions. So briefly, I'm gonna touch base on people with disabilities, transportation and mobility from my perspective and how they intersect. So I'll focus primarily on Detroit. First off, Detroit Disability Power is an organization that works to build political power of and with the disability community. We do that by organizing, and we do that through advocacy. You can always check out our website at detroitdisabilitypower.com. Next, when we talk about disability in Detroit, Detroit has 19% of Detroit's population lives with disability. It's about 126,000 people. That's a large amount of people, and it's not monolithic as a population. People with disabilities in Detroit are similar to other communities where you have people with hearing difficulty, vision difficulty, cognitive difficulty, ambulatory or mobility difficulty, self-care difficulty, independent living difficulty, and then mental health difficulties and disabilities. So in Detroit specifically, you can break down these populations to hearing disabilities, 20,000 people, vision, 27,000 people, cognitive disability, 50,000 people, ambulatory, about 76,000 people, self-care, 36,000 people, independent living, 52,000 people, and as far as mental health goes, we don't track those numbers in the census. And as you can imagine, that number has only grown during this pandemic, recession, widespread racism and oppression moment. So there's much need and much assistance to go out to each and every one of these communities. But when we talk about these buckets of disabilities, if you will, Megan's absolutely right by saying that, listen, you can't just talk about one aspect of a person. The idea of intersectionality is looking at people in their honored, complex, cumulative identities. And these include things from age to athleticism, to criminal background, to race, to sex, to sexual orientation, gender, geography, ethnicity, job function, marital status, so on and so forth. There's a million different ways we can look at one another, and we ought to. And if we don't, then we're not going to get the kind of holistic viewpoint needed to solve the kind of holistic problems that we have facing us today. So the majority of people living with disability in Detroit are women, and over 100,000 of that 19% are Black or African American. So there are intersections of oppression in Detroit and across the region. Jumping back over to transportation and mobility. So when I talk about mobility, I look at it through a view of definitions. And so mobility typically focuses on moving goods and people, but plain speak, it is the ability to move freely and easily, right? And I would argue it shouldn't just be moving freely and easily, it should also be moving fairly and unafraid. And that's very important in this moment when you talk about different identities that ride bikes, different identities that intersect with law enforcement in streets and on sidewalks. And it's something that we should take account of and reflect on often. So people with disabilities are just like everyone else. I saw Rachel put in a question here earlier talking about that she is blind and she does not know who to talk to in terms of street design. And I pointed her in the direction, and I filled it out here. Rachel, I'm not sure if you were able to access it, but you want to talk to your urban planners and urban designers in your city. They will help to mitigate issues and help to work with you to find solutions in terms of how to roll out the right kind of infrastructure. But people with disabilities, again, interact the same way. We use public transportation, or the community uses public transportation. People use what's called micromobility, which I don't like that term, but whatever. We're talking about bike sharing, scooter sharing. People use automobile-based modes like car sharing, rides on demand, micro transit, so van pools and such. And then commute-based models, so carpooling, etc. Each one of these options needs to be accessible to all of those buckets that we mentioned early on, not just in one sense, people in the vehicle, but how people get to the vehicle, how people go home from the vehicle, how people are able to acknowledge the vehicle. And in that vein too, we really have to be mindful when I talk about holistic mobility considerations. You have to be able to consider that first and last mile idea, how you get to and from something. And in Detroit, that's a really big conversation because 132 people were killed by traffic crashes per year. And this could include pedestrian or cycling or car to car, but 132 people killed every year on average between 2014 and 2018, totaling 529 people. In the city of Detroit. These are really high numbers, and Detroit has historically had high pedestrian fatality rates and injury rates and traffic violence rates. So all of this matters in terms of getting back to the idea of mobility and the definition of moving freely and easily through various transit options, but also fairly and also unafraid. People should not yes, we want safe options, but people should not be afraid to participate in their cities or their communities. One last point I'll make in terms of climate change. New York Times had their magazine come out last week or the week before that focused on climate change. And it says, new research suggests that climate change will cause humans to move across the planet at an unprecedented, destabilizing scale. For many, the great climate migration has already begun. When we consider people with disabilities in terms of moving across countries, which is mobility, or moving across county lines, Wayne County to Oakland County, we have to consider a whole variety of things, from access to well thought out and well-performing systems, to access to housing. And jumping into the intersectional lens again, there's not a lot of accessible, affordable, and permanent housing for people that have ambulatory or mobility issues in the city of Detroit. And so as we see mass movement on a large scale throughout our communities in the coming years, we really have to make sure each and every community is prepared to adopt and to serve everyone with every need that they have. It's the humane way to develop and build, and hopefully we can get more disability consciousness, not just on this panel, but also into the halls of power. So I'll stop there. Hope that's okay, Megan.
That's great. That's great. I knew you would do a great job of tying in a lot of these very important issues. And actually, with your comment about reaching out to urban planners, there was a question as to what is the best way to contact urban planners or county commissioners. If you have any, I guess I don't know where this person is from, but I guess it depends on your city. You can certainly call your city and find out who are the urban planners, what is the planning commission, or track down your county commissioner. Any other suggestions for how someone can reach out and share some of those needs and concerns?
This is Jeffrey again. Yeah, I mean, you want to look at the directory on a website or through the phone book. You want to think about the issue that you have in advance about talking about it. You know, some folks may have a broad base of education and knowledge. Some folks may be new to things. You know, there may be someone that's focused in public works actually instead of the planning department, that in someone's city where they roll out medians or islands or do the curb cuts. But typically, if you start asking questions and you say, listen, you know, I see some unsafe infrastructure, it concerns me, I participate with it and engage with it on a daily basis. Here is my problem. The hope is that you have an engaging county staff or city staff. And if not, you can always get a hold of me. I'm happy to, you know, raise my voice for other people.
Excellent, excellent. Well, we will get into some more of the discussion in a few minutes, but I want to invite on our last panelist, a excellent youth activist, if that's a reasonable term, from 0 Hour and the Vote for Our Future campaign. She's here in Detroit, but it's the international, Detroit area, but this is an international effort. Khadija, tell us more about what your team is up to.
Hi, Meg. Thank you so much for having me. So Vote for Our Future is a youth-led grassroots environmental organization. And we're an international organization, so we have youth activists across the world working to make this planet more livable, as we're all trying to do. And we right now are working on a campaign called the Vote for Our Future campaign, where we're trying to increase youth voter turnout across the country. I am a Detroit fellow for that, so I'm working within Southeast Michigan, specifically trying to get youth voter turnout here, because it should be higher than it is, frankly. So I think that, like, this is great. I've learned so much from all of you, so thank you so much for this amazing opportunity to be here. But what we're really trying to do is we're trying to connect with organizations and different people across Wayne County, across Southeast Detroit, or Southeast Michigan and Detroit, and try to encourage them to think more consciously about their future, about what they're voting for, and make those conscious make those conscious decisions to vote for a more equitable life for everybody and vote for a more sustainable future. So that's kind of what we've been working on, and we've been doing some outreach to other amazing groups, just like the ones here, and we've just been speaking and getting to know, kind of connecting with the community and engaging with the community in any way we can. So
Excellent. I know that you guys have been working hard to ensure that everyone is registered and gets out to vote. So I figured I would toss up another poll here and see among the folks here, how often do the folks on our line here vote? Are you registered? Do you vote in some elections, in every election? And as we're getting those in, do you want to say anything else, Khadija, about about what you guys have going on, or I mean, about ways people might be able to get involved, or ways that people can help out in the efforts that you guys are doing?
Yeah, definitely. We have we actually have a website that I can link to the chat, which if anyone wants to check it out. We also have an Instagram. We have social medias at This Is 0 Hour. So basically we've been, as I just mentioned, we've been working on voter turnout, and I know that the primaries just happened in Michigan, and it's all these amazing talks that we've been having about our county issues and just like local issues are just a microcosm of what's happening across the world, or across the United States. And it's so important that every single election we have, we get out there and we vote and we get our voices heard. So we just had like the local one, and I really hope that everyone here voted. But if not, the upcoming elections, I really urge all of you to show up with your votes. And yeah, so I did link our website here, and we don't have a vote tripling link yet, but it's coming up soon. So please stay tuned. And yeah.
Right. So I'm pleased to see, other than one person who reach out, and we'd be happy to help you make sure you get registered, to that one person who voted that they don't, or said that they don't. But we've got a whole lot of people who vote every single chance they can, and a few people who vote in the big elections. So we got a lot of people who are big proponents of voting. And so we'll see if there are ways that we can help out with the help out further with the efforts that you guys are doing, which is excellent. Because as you said, vote for our future. This stuff, there's a lot of very, very important matters that are being decided, whether it's at the national level or at the local level. As we were just talking about, a lot of decisions are made at the city levels. City planners, mayors, county commissioners can have a huge impact on whether on the things. In some ways, the local offices have even more impact on our daily lives. So excellent. Well, thank you so much. I hope you'll be able to stick around a little bit as we move into some more discussion. There's been already a ton of great discussion on the chat. I haven't been able to follow all of it, but I'm great to see so much sharing and so many ideas there. So let's see. I don't know if these are explicitly for anyone particular, but we've got a couple questions in the Q&A, and I'll just, as a reminder, if you have questions for the panel, you can type them into the Q&A, and we'll get to as many of those as we can. And you can raise your hand. At the bottom of your screen, you should have an opportunity for a raise hand function, and then we can call on you and invite you to join in the discussion too. One of the questions was, are there any signs of positive signs of Rochester leadership desiring public transit? We probably got a couple people in the chat who'd be able to share that a little bit, even more than I could, but I know that that's been a real struggle. We've got Rochester and Rochester Hills have not been part of the regional transit system, and there's a lot of people who are then stuck without options for how to get around. There was a poll a couple years ago asking voters if they wanted to even have the opportunity to vote on it, let alone whether they would vote yes. And fully half the people said, yeah, let's at least discuss and vote on this. And that's before they even knew exactly what could be provided. I know that some of our, there are a number of people who are working to make that happen. So I'd say plug into the chat. Thomas Yasbak and Corey Rowe are both working very hard to get Rochester and Rochester Hills to join into the transit system here. Looks like Brother Tom has had his hand up for a while. I'm gonna add you Brother Tom, to the conversation here. I know you've been waiting for a long time, so hope you're still there and have something you wanted to share. Brother Tom? Or maybe he needed to step away. We'll see if we can come back to him. I also see Robin. Robin Hoffman was also interested in.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great. Oh my goodness, I've always wanted to live in Detroit. But anyway, I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Oh.
So you can just imagine what's going on over here. But today is the day that everybody's miming. But I just want to say.
Oh, did we lose Robin?
Oh.
I'm 64 years old. I've been an activist. Hello, hello, hello.
There you are. Okay, sorry, we lost you for a quick sec, but
I've
keep
been an activist for 64 years. And climate is all about, you know, my purview. But what I want to say is what everybody seems to be talking about is so great, except for this, that you really need to include the cost and profits when you talk about this, and how instead of saying it's going to be taxable or we're going to somehow get it from the government and all the taxes and all that, it's not going to happen quickly. So instead, why not look at showing people, investors, like people who are making apps are making billions of dollars tax-free. Why not tell them, oh, if you put in a fleet of electric buses or electric trains, your annual revenue is going to be $20 billion. You know what I'm saying? Instead of always looking for the tax base.
well, I definitely hear you. I think that's it is important to talk about the costs and the benefits. Unfortunately, there aren't really many places, or almost any places, where a public transit system can truly be profitable, because it is a public service. Just like we don't look at our parks, our community parks, to make a profit, or assume that our fire department is going to make a profit. But those are things that are essential for our community and are worth investing in. Now, you can absolutely point out that in metro regions that have invested in rapid transit, in fixed route rail lines, bus rapid transit, they've often received 6 to 10 times as much as they invested back in economic development returns, in terms of more jobs created, in terms of property value increases. There are definitely an enormous number of benefits, and we need to make sure anytime we're talking costs, we're also giving a clear sense to those benefits too. So thank you very much, Robin. There's also a question that I might try to open up to a broader audience. One of the challenges that the region's had is attracting and retaining bus drivers, bus driver talent. Part of the challenge is that there's a lot of, it's a hard job, and a lot of people are working. It can be some tough hours. You've got to deal with the public. You've got to also have a commercial driver's license. And so some people, once they get their commercial driver's license, switch over to working for a trucking company. But I'm curious if anyone has thoughts or ideas as to ways to better attract and retain bus drivers so we can maintain that high quality of service that we all need. Yeah, Jeffrey, please.
This is Jeffrey. We need to pay them. We need to pay them more, and we need to keep them safe. And we need to work with the unions to make sure that everyone feels empowered and listened to by their communities. Absolutely.
That is a huge question. There's definitely major efforts to improve safety by at least during this COVID time, at least making sure that there are barriers and plenty of PPE and things of that sort. But yeah, the pay is really a challenge. The agencies need to pay the drivers a living wage and give them the You got a lot of A++s from that one. Anyone else want to add any other thoughts as to how to address that? Yeah, Haley, please. What have you seen nationally?
I really appreciate this question. It's like such having a huge, sorry if there's sirens outside. We're having a huge operator shortage nationally. And I think to Jeffrey's point, yes, like that is a large part and due to folks not getting paid well for this work and feeling like perhaps they could go drive for Uber or Lyft and have more flexibility over their schedules. And so we really need to think about how to make operating a bus as competitive with that. So there's the pay, there's the fact that it can take a really long time between when you're hired to advance, and you are sort of stuck with the shitty schedules, for the first couple years when you're working in a transit agency, and that's just like, if you can choose between that and driving for Uber, why would you do that, right? And so agencies really need to rethink the way that they, allocate those type of things. Another thing is bathroom access. It's not sexy to talk about, but I mean, operators just report that as like their number one challenge, which really results in lifelong health problems from holding it in. So one of the things that we recommended is for transit agencies to either, have porta potties at the end of lines that operators can use, or to contract with businesses, which is harder than ever during COVID to make that happen. But, we can't just like expect them to hold their pee for 8 hours. That's crazy. And so another thing to reduce driver stress is, of course, all-door boarding, which limits the interactions between operators and passengers over the fare, which is consistently one of the things that they rank as the most stressful, is having to enforce that fare. So if folks are just tapping in at the back door, they don't even have to administer the payment at all. And then, of course, bus-only lanes make their job so much easier because they don't have to spend their time navigating through traffic. So I'm just going to drop in a short report that we did about this topic into the chat, and hope you find it informative.
Absolutely. I know, in fact, when the COVID shutdowns were hitting, the DDOT drivers just did sort of a wildcat strike. They were really concerned about their safety. And one of the other major issues was bathrooms. As stores were shutting down, they had designed the lines to make sure that there was time and space for bathroom usage and for breaks. Everyone needs a break sometimes. And so the mayor did ensure that if there weren't agreements with stores to come in, there were porta potties there. Yeah, those basic quality of life. If you're gonna be as a human on a job, you need to be treated right. Excellent. Thank you for that. If there are any other people who want to add something in, who want to join the discussion, you can certainly raise your hand. I will say, let's see, another one of the questions that came up is, to what extent, I think in the chat, but to what extent is are the auto companies a barrier to transit progress in the Motor City? And I can share that was absolutely the case 60, 80 years ago. And yes, the oil and tire companies did conspire to dismantle the old streetcar system in Detroit and LA, and pretty much got away with it. But for at least the last 15 or 20 years here in the Detroit area, the big three automakers and the auto unions have really recognized that if they want our region to grow and thrive, if they want to be able to attract the top talent from across the world to come to Dearborn or to Auburn Hills, that they really need to have not just transit, but the vibrant urban area that transit helps make, that frequent, reliable transit helps make possible. So the auto companies are absolutely supportive. They put some money into the queue line, not that that's the best example, but they are very supportive. They endorsed the past ballot measures. Ford's even funding as they move into the old Michigan Central train station, a number of mobility projects in the area to explore ways to improve mobility in that area, and possibly to extend the restart train service at Michigan Central. They're at least studying it. We'll see. Anyone else want to comment on that at all before we move on to other questions? All right. That's actually, I get that a lot. A lot of people assume, it can't happen here because of the auto companies. But at this point, the attitude that somehow you must be pro-transit or pro-auto and you can't somehow support both is a bigger barrier in this region. Another question that we got here, potentially a loaded question, but I think that's all right. What are a couple of the main differences between cities that have effective public transit and those that don't? That could certainly be a huge question, but I would see who wants to weigh in on some of the factors that are different.
This is Jeffrey. I just want to say briefly that I don't know if I view it as competition as much as just getting a lay of the land and understanding of who has what and why. I grew up in Huntington Woods in Oakland County with my family. Since then, my mother and father have moved to East Lansing. My father works for the state, so they're closer now. But as they age in place and in community, if they were to continue to have lived in the burbs, what's concerning for me is that there's less ability to access transit there than there is in Detroit in terms of all the places you can go. Now, yes, there is transit in the suburbs, to be sure, but the way the suburbs are laid out, you may have to travel more for that first and last mile to access something like that. And that schedule may not be as robust as Detroit's, but the infrastructure there is what I'm getting at. It may not be amenable to growing and aging into your golden years. And that's really, really important right now. People are living longer. And when I talk about disability, people age into disability. And so we need to make sure that we invest right now for the future. I'm sure that others can talk about that point as well.
But yes, being able to have communities that work for all ages is a critical factor. Andrew, what else did you want to share?
I think it's a good question. I would kind of add that just to say, I don't know if the reference to the question is asking to talk about the politics specifically, because I think in some areas it is a political issue, and I do want to acknowledge that. But I think that if you had 20 communities in Oakland County, I know you have more than that, but if you looked at 20 communities that have and don't have transit, they would all have different reasons for being part of the system and the ways that they were benefiting from the system. I think in some places like Novi, which I used to live in, they did actually, so a couple of things, there's gradients of transit as well. So Novi has universal transit for people over 65, right? They have a senior bus, you can call it up anytime. It will literally come right to where you are. And so there are ways for people of a certain age to get around, but that's not universal transit for everybody. It's not like a transit system like we would view it, but it is a form of transit access for certain people. And then if you go back far enough, they actually did have a bus, is my understanding, at the 12 Oaks Mall at one time that did run. So they've had on and off as well with the traditional system. So the reasons that they're not in the system right now, the regional system, is largely political. But in rural areas, there gets to be the debate about how to tie in service to the broader system. And I think it's important that when we build a system that it benefits everybody. But I think that, especially where we've had those political holdouts, where there's people literally walking right in Novi, from the edge of Farmington Hills down the street to get to their job. I think those are very obviously areas where we failed. So I think specifically when we look at our platform and how we identify transit gaps, I think those are some of the low-hanging fruit we want to hit on. And I think that the reasons for those are absolutely political, but I don't want to paint every community that doesn't have great transit as being political. It may be logistical, or there may be other factors not being funded properly. So
yeah, the funding is absolutely a key factor there. And I would say even in areas that do have things like senior shuttles, in a lot of cases, those are very limited in when they operate. You have to reserve your ride. Yes, they'll come to your door and take you to your destination, but you have to reserve that trip 2, 3, 4 days ahead of time, and you have to wait for, they'll be there somewhere between 2 and 4 to pick you up, and you better be waiting for us. And oh wait, you gotta only travel between 8 a.m. and 6 p.m. on Monday through Friday. Don't try to have a social life. So I think you're right. That's definitely the question of gradients of transit. One of the factors that I think makes the biggest difference is having transit that really works around your schedule. When you know you've got a great transit, when you can walk out the door to a transit line, and not even look at a schedule, but know that it'll be there in the next couple of minutes. You don't have to wait around. You don't have to map out, okay, well, that one comes in every 45 minutes, and then I need to get onto this transfer, so that means I have to be there right at this transit that you have to work around. It may be technically possible, but it's certainly not convenient for people's everyday lives. People should be able to really live their lives without having to own a car. That to me is one of the big differences in cities that do have effective transit and those that don't. Anything, Haley, that maybe you want to add?
Sure. I mean, I'll add that cities that have legacy transit systems obviously have a huge leg up, right? Cities that developed in the era of the automobile are sort of having to retrofit transit to fit, sprawling development patterns. And it's a lot harder to run great transit in low density environments. But I always do point to Seattle, as a city, it's fairly dense, but, it's a newish city. And this, they have just basically committed to making transit work in their city. And it might be relevant to folks in Detroit to hear about, how King County has basically made a commitment to buying transit service from the local transit provider, King County Metro. So that funds, additional hours of transit service within the city that has enabled the number of people that live within, walking distance of frequent transit. That number has gone from, I think, 35% to 70% in a decade. So, having that, it can happen, I guess is what I'm saying, in these newer cities where you might think that transit would be harder. But, it comes down to leadership and having people in power that understand and ride transit. That makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. And I think I just realized we've been having such a good chat. We're running short on time. There's certainly some good discussion going. I hate to cut it off, but people can either continue some of that conversation over on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Detroit Transit, where there's also a little bit of discussion been going on. Or certainly each of our organizations has opportunities for people to get involved. But I think that's a great way to wrap up. If communities truly are truly interested in addressing the massive threat that is climate change, transit must be a part of that. People can't keep driving further and further and further and expect to be able to address climate change. If we build cities that are truly accessible to everyone, if we build cities and rebuild our cities that are easily walkable and bikeable, where you can, within a 15-minute walk or ride, get to the things that you need in your everyday life, where driving can be an occasional thing, not an everyday necessity, where people can invest, instead of investing thousands of dollars in their cars that just gets poured down the gas tank, they can instead be investing in building up their homes, or in education, or in healthy foods. If our communities truly want to make that investment, we can develop the excellent transit that it takes to make it truly convenient for everyone. I want to ask each of our panelists, there's sort of my closing thoughts. I'm going to ask each of our panelists if you have any closing thoughts that you'd like to share before we wrap up for tonight. Yes, Jeffrey.
This is Jeffrey. I'd like to remind everyone to vote. And please be considerate to people with disabilities, champion them wherever you go, in every organization, at every table, on every screen, in every room. Be thoughtful, be champions. We'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Andrew, any final comments you'd like to?
I just want to thank everybody that joined us tonight. At the end of the day, like, our philosophy is we're a grassroots movement, so we rely on volunteers to get it done. And I think a lot of the organizations that are with us tonight are the same. I saw a couple Oakland County commissioners join us tonight in the chat. So we had Commissioner Gwen Markham and the Water Resource Commissioner Jim Nash for a while, which is really exciting. And I just think that this is such an important conversation and a long overdue. You know, the Oakland County Climate Campaign, we've been talking transit. We've never actually been able to get everyone together and do one of these listen and learn sessions. So Megan, I just want to offer so much appreciation. Thank you for facilitating tonight. And thank you to everyone that that joined and contributed, because I really think it helped us to expand the issue.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for all you're doing there, Andrew. We look forward to continuing on that effort. Haley, final thoughts or comments for us here in Detroit?
Yeah, this is such a pleasure. I love talking about this stuff. I could talk about it all night. You know, this discussion is really about changing who has the power, and we need to make it known that transit riders have the power. And we need to make it a problem for our electeds if they're not voting in ways that reflect that. And so, you know, I would just encourage everybody to, like, go out, make some noise on this stuff, and you know, show people what's possible. There are lots of examples of really easy, quick build transit projects that have changed people's lives, that you can point to in the US, in suburban places. It doesn't need to be Europe. And so, you know, go out and make some good.
Yes. Make what's the phrase? Good trouble. So I have one final poll. I'd love some input on your thoughts on this poll. Oops. Okay. Yeah. What did you learn from this event? How much did you enjoy it? Any suggestions for future topics? Certainly feel free to reach out to us at info@Detroit Transit or on Facebook if you have ideas. Well, the Sierra Club, this is possibly, or the Green Climate Oakland effort, this is possibly the last of a series of town halls that virtual town halls they've been doing. Drew's really, this is just our second. We look to do even more of these virtual transit town halls, exploring intersections with different topics and other ways to educate and engage on this effort. So again, thank you so much to all of our partner groups, to all of our panelists. I always want to thank those of you who are true members. Our members make our work possible. And if you're not, go to detroittransit.org/donate and join True as a member. And everyone, yeah, let's stay involved. There's great opportunities at the local, the state, at the federal level to create the future that our community and our planet need. So thank you, everyone, and have a great night.